You're not going to believe what happened inside that courtroom. Not today. Not after everything the world thought it knew. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because in a room packed with reporters, legal teams, and people who came expecting nothing more than another routine hearing, something happened that froze the air. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle apologized. But that wasn't the moment that stunned everyone. It was what came next. Before the judge even responded, before the rustle of papers settled, before anyone could process the shock, Harry's voice broke through the silence with a sentence no one expected to hear from a member of the royal family. A sentence that would ignite headlines across the world. A sentence that raised one impossible question. Why would they apologize now? And more importantly, what exactly were they apologizing for? People in the courtroom didn't lean forward, they held still. It was the kind of silence that only follows a truth no one is prepared to receive. A truth that doesn't just alter a narrative, it detonates it. Let's pause for a second. Ask yourself this. What would force two of the most media-trained, image-controlled public figures on the planet to walk into court and suddenly shift their entire strategy? Was it pressure? Exposure? A private agreement gone wrong? Or something deeper? Something that had been building long before cameras arrived? Because this moment didn't appear out of thin air. According to those present, the apology wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't polished. It wasn't even confidently delivered. It sounded like something that had been decided at the last possible second, as if whatever happened behind the scenes in the hours before the hearing changed everything they thought they were going to say. And that's where this story truly begins. Not with the apology itself, but with the question no one inside that courtroom could answer. What forced their hand? For years, the narrative surrounding Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana has been tightly controlled, protected, and wrapped in layers of privacy that only fueled more speculation. Some people shrugged it off. Others noticed the inconsistencies, the missing details, the unusual announcements, the timelines that didn't match the standard royal playbook. But still, nothing like this ever happened. Until now. Because this wasn't a statement released through a spokesperson. It wasn't a carefully worded press release. It wasn't a leaked source claiming to represent their side. This was face-to-face, under oath, in a courtroom, a place where words don't just matter. They carry consequences. And here's what makes it even stranger. No one expected it. Not the reporters. Not the legal teams. Not even some members of the royal family who, according to whispers that rippled instantly across social media, were caught completely off guard. So why today? Why this hearing? And why a sudden apology that seemed to signal the beginning of something, not the end? Because as shocking as that moment was, it was only the first crack. The real turning point came seconds later, but we're not there yet. Not until we understand the tension that led to this moment. Because while the world focused on what was said in court, almost no one noticed the most important detail of all. Meghan didn't speak first. She looked at Harry, not with panic, not with anger, but with a kind of silent confirmation, as if the two of them had reached an agreement that had nothing to do with legal strategy, and everything to do with survival. And then, Harry nodded. Just once. Small, quick, almost unnoticeable. But that single gesture changed the tone of the entire room. Ask yourself, what kind of truth requires mutual consent before it can even be spoken? Because apologies don't rewrite history. They acknowledge it. And what the world heard next wasn't an explanation. It was the beginning of an unraveling. People who had spent years defending them suddenly didn't know what to say. People who had been questioning their choices wondered if they had been right all along. And people who had stayed silent realized silence was no longer an option. But this moment didn't just shake the public. It triggered something behind palace walls that no one saw coming. A reaction that had been building for years. A reaction that was waiting for just one crack in the foundation. And today, the crack appeared. But before we get to what happened after the apology, before we uncover the document that changed everything, before we get to the revelation that wasn't supposed to leave that courtroom, we need to go back. Not months, not years. Just 72 hours before this hearing. Because that's when the story shifted. And that's when the truth began to surface. And what happened inside those hours will make everything that follows make sense, including why the world is now asking the one question no one ever imagined would be connected to the royal family. What if Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana were never biologically theirs? But hold on, we're not there yet. Because what comes next is the moment everything changed. And no one saw it coming. But here's the part almost no one is talking about. That apology didn't come from a place of clarity. It came from pressure. Not the public pressure we're used to seeing online. Not the media pressure that has followed them for years. This was something different. The kind of pressure that doesn't come from outside noise, but from information. Information that someone else had. Because according to people close to the legal environment, there was a shift. Not gradually, not over weeks, but suddenly. Almost as if someone presented something Harry and Meghan were never prepared to confront. Think about that for a second. What could possibly exist that would corner two people who have walked away from the most powerful institution in the United Kingdom, moved across the world, built a public identity on truth-telling and independence, and faced global backlash without flinching? It had to be something they couldn't ignore. Something they couldn't spin. Something they couldn't deny. And whatever it was, it didn't just force an apology. It forced timing. Because this apology didn't happen at the conclusion of a hearing, or during closing remarks, or in a controlled media moment. It happened at the beginning, when nobody was expecting anything. But here's where the tension sharpens even further. The judge didn't ask for an apology. No one demanded it. There was no direct trigger. So why now? Why here? Why like this? Even seasoned journalists, people who have covered royal events for decades, said they had never seen anything like it. One reporter whispered to another, "This wasn't planned." And that sentence spread across the room like a spark. Because if it wasn't planned, then something went wrong, or something finally caught up. And here's where the story takes a turn most people missed. The apology wasn't the shocking part. It was what Harry didn't say. He didn't explain. He didn't clarify. He didn't defend. He apologized, and then stopped, leaving a silence so heavy that even the judge hesitated before responding. What does that tell you? Apologies without explanations are not apologies. They're signals. Signals that the explanation either can't be given or isn't allowed yet. Which of those do you think is more likely? Because up until that moment, every public narrative surrounding Archie and Lilibet followed the same pattern. Controlled release, limited access, tight protection, and absolute consistency. Birth announcements, christening details, public images, all carefully managed. So if everything was airtight, what changed? Something did. And it wasn't small. Because even Meghan's posture gave it away. People who know body language said she wasn't defensive. And she wasn't confident. She looked resigned. Not broken. Not angry. Resigned. As if she already knew what was coming and had stopped fighting it. And when someone stops fighting a narrative they've protected for years, it means one thing. The outcome is no longer in their control. But let's not jump ahead. Because before the apology, before the tension, before the silence, there was something else that happened inside that courtroom. A moment most people missed, because they weren't looking for it. When Harry and Meghan entered, they didn't walk side by side. There was space between them. Not dramatic, but noticeable. And when they sat down, they didn't look at each other. Not right away. For a couple known for constant eye contact, for synchronized public presence, for hand-holding even during official events. That change wasn't just unusual, it was revealing. And the first time Meghan looked at Harry wasn't during the hearing. It was seconds before he spoke. That means she didn't know when he was going to do it. She only knew that he was going to. Ask yourself this. If two people enter a courtroom with a shared strategy, why would only one of them know the moment it begins? Because either the plan shifted at the very last second, or there wasn't a plan at all. And both possibilities are explosive. But the tension goes deeper. Because this wasn't just a legal moment. It was a personal one. Imagine carrying a secret for years. Imagine structuring your life around protecting it. Imagine believing you will never be forced to confront it publicly. And then, suddenly, someone presents information that removes your ability to choose silence. That is what this moment felt like. Not a confession, not transparency, but inevitability. People watching described Harry's tone as flat, not emotional, not shaken, almost rehearsed in the way someone practices something they hope they will never have to say. But Meghan's reaction was completely different. She didn't look surprised. She looked tired. Not physically, emotionally. As if this wasn't the moment she feared, but the moment she expected. Now ask yourself, if someone expects impact, what does that mean? It means the truth didn't arrive today. It arrived long before. And today was just the echo. But here's where things become even more unsettling. After Harry spoke, something happened that no one predicted. The judge paused, not for dramatic effect, for confirmation. He asked if they understood the implications of their statement. Harry nodded. Meghan remained still, and in that tiny difference, the room felt the shift. Because agreement isn't silence. Silence is distance. And distance, in a moment like this, means hesitation. Now, let's address the question every viewer is thinking right now. Is this apology connected to the rumors that have followed them for years? For a long time, people dismissed those questions as speculation. Some believed the timeline differences meant nothing. Others believed the secrecy was simply protection, and many believed the story would fade on its own. But today changed that. Because rumors don't end careers. Facts do, and apologies only appear when facts are close enough. That silence is no longer protection. It's risk. Which brings us to the most important point of this entire introduction. The apology wasn't an ending. It was the beginning. Because what followed wasn't closure. It was escalation. According to multiple people who observed the hearing, the judge didn't move on. He opened the floor, and someone stood up. Not from Harry's legal team, not from Meghan's, and not from the opposing side. Someone representing a different interest altogether. Someone whose presence wasn't expected. Someone whose involvement raises a new layer of questions no one ever thought they would have to ask. And when this individual spoke, you could feel the air change again. Not because of volume. Because of impact. They referenced documents. Not rumors. Not speculation. Documents. And that's when everything shifted. Not outside the courtroom. Inside. Because from that moment forward, the hearing was no longer about what Harry and Meghan said. It became about what they could no longer control. But we're still not at the turning point. Not yet. Because before we reveal what happened next, you need to understand one critical detail. This hearing was never supposed to include anything about Archie or Lilibet. Their names were not on the official agenda. Their parentage was not part of the original claim. There was no reason for them to be mentioned at all. So if the topic wasn't scheduled, and the apology wasn't requested, what forced it into the room? That answer begins 72 hours before the hearing, when a message was delivered. That changed everything. And once that message reached the right person, the countdown began. Because the truth didn't surface in court. It surfaced before it. And what happened in those 3 days set off a chain reaction that neither Harry nor Meghan could stop. We're about to step into that timeline. But be prepared, because what unfolded during those 72 hours will make the apology make sense in a way that is far more shocking than the apology itself. And what comes next changed the story forever. And no one saw it coming. No one walked into that courtroom expecting history to be rewritten. Reporters came armed with pre-written headlines. Camera operators came assuming they already knew which soundbite would matter. Even the legal teams entered the room with the quiet confidence of people who believed the script was already set. This was supposed to be routine, procedural, predictable. But the moment Prince Harry stepped inside, predictability died. People felt it before they understood it. A subtle shift. An energy that didn't match the casual tone outside the building. It wasn't dramatic. No storm, no shouting, no cameras flashing at the perfect moment. It was quieter than that. Unsettlingly quiet. Harry didn't scan the room like he normally does. He didn't nod at familiar faces, didn't offer polite acknowledgement, didn't show the practiced ease of someone who has spent his entire life under scrutiny. He moved with the kind of focus that only exists when someone is carrying something heavier than the world knows. But the real signal came next. Meghan walked behind him, not beside him. Not by a step or two, but with a noticeable gap, as if both of them were entering the same space, but not the same moment. And people noticed. One reporter later wrote that it felt like watching two people who were connected by circumstance, not conversation. Another whispered that it looked like they were walking towards something, not away from it. But here's what made the moment unforgettable. Their arrival didn't feel like an entrance. It felt like a countdown. The room shifted before either of them spoke. Conversations trailed off. Pens stopped moving. Even the judge paused before beginning the session, as if he sensed, without knowing why, that something was different. But no one, not even the most seasoned royal correspondent, could have predicted what would happen minutes later. Because the first sign of the unraveling came in a detail so small that most people would have missed it. Harry didn't sit down right away. He hesitated, just for a second, but long enough to be noticeable. Long enough for the room to register uncertainty where confidence normally lived. He glanced at the table in front of him, then at the space beside him, as if waiting for confirmation that never arrived. Meghan sat without looking at him. No eye contact, no reassuring nod, no silent exchange that married couples often share in tense moments. It was as if they were two people experiencing the same situation from different emotional distances. And then the hearing began. At first, everything appeared normal. The clerk read the opening statements. Legal teams shuffled papers. The judge adjusted his glasses and prepared to proceed as usual. But then, without warning, Harry stood up. No cue, no prompting, no signal from his attorneys. Just a sudden decision. And the room froze. When a royal stands, people expect purpose. A prepared statement. A legal clarification. A controlled message approved by advisors. But none of those things were happening. There was no folder in his hand. No notes. No legal script. Just a tightening in his jaw and a stillness in his posture that didn't match anything the public had ever seen from him. Reporters later described the silence as unnatural. The kind of silence that feels like the world is holding its breath. Then he spoke. The words didn't come out smoothly. They weren't projected with confidence or delivered with the assertiveness of someone defending themselves. His voice was low, measured, almost fragile in a way that didn't match his usual tone. I would like to express an apology. That was it. No explanation. No context. No leading statement. Just a single sentence that didn't fit the moment or the case. It was so unexpected that several people looked around the courtroom, trying to determine whether they had misheard him. The judge lifted his eyes, startled, not dramatically, but unmistakably. An apology? For what? Nothing in the hearing up to that moment required one. No accusation had been made. No confrontation had occurred. No procedural issue had taken place. There was no legal reason for those words. And that's when confusion turned into shock. Because apologies inside a courtroom are not symbolic. They are strategic. They happen when someone is attempting to lessen consequences, prevent escalation, or acknowledge responsibility. But none of those applied. So what exactly was Harry apologizing for? Even his own legal team seemed unprepared. One attorney shifted in his seat, eyebrows tightening. Not in anger, but in disbelief. As if he had just watched the case veer off the road. Meghan still hadn't moved. She didn't look startled. She didn't look upset. She didn't even look at Harry. Instead, she stared forward, expression unreadable, hands folded in her lap. And that lack of reaction said more than any display of emotion ever could. Silence can be agreement. It can be refusal, or it can be resignation. In that moment, no one knew which one it was. But the most shocking part of all was what didn't follow. Harry didn't continue. He didn't explain the apology. He didn't provide reasoning. He didn't offer context. He spoke the sentence and stopped, leaving the room suspended in uncertainty. It was as if the apology wasn't meant to resolve anything, only to acknowledge the existence of something unspoken. The judge leaned forward, choosing his next words carefully. He asked whether Harry understood the seriousness of making an apology in this context. Harry nodded once. Not confidently, not defiantly, but with the kind of acceptance that suggests inevitability. Then, finally, Meghan moved. She exhaled, not loudly, not dramatically, but visibly. A breath that looked less like relief and more like surrender. People who later watched the footage said it was the moment they realized the apology wasn't spontaneous. It was expected, but expected by whom? If Meghan wasn't surprised, why didn't she speak? Why didn't she clarify? Why wasn't this a joint statement? Because everything about their body language suggested two things. Harry initiated the moment. Meghan agreed to it. But agreement is not the same as unity. And that difference mattered. Because the judge, sensing the confusion in the room, asked a second question. Was the apology addressing something not yet introduced into the case? And that was the moment everything shifted. Harry didn't answer immediately. He hesitated, the same hesitation from earlier returning like a shadow. Then he said a sentence that changed the temperature of the room. There are matters we will need to clarify. Not today, not here, not at this moment, but soon. The wording was careful, not accidental. Matters, not allegations, not rumors, not misunderstandings. Matters implies something real. something established, something that exists. And the phrase "we will need to clarify" didn't sound voluntary. It sounded required. The judge paused again, weighing the response. Because if clarification is coming in a legal environment, it means someone else already knows the information, which raises the only question that mattered in that moment. Who forced this into the open? Because apologies are not proactive. They are reactive. Someone acted. Someone presented something. Someone removed their ability to maintain silence. And that unseen presence became the focus of the room. But here's where the moment becomes even more unusual. The apology did not lead to discussion. The judge didn't ask for details. No one demanded immediate explanation. No argument broke out. Instead, the room entered a suspended state. A moment where everyone understood something monumental had happened, without understanding what it meant. And then, like a pressure valve releasing too slowly, the hearing resumed, as if nothing unusual had occurred. But nothing felt normal anymore. Reporters scribbled furiously, trying to capture the moment without knowing how to frame it. Attorneys whispered to each other, attempting to recalibrate strategies they didn't realize needed changing. Observers shifted in their seats, trying to make sense of a moment that offered no clarity. Meanwhile, Harry sat back down, still not looking at Meghan, still not offering explanation, still carrying a posture that suggested the apology was not the hardest part of the day. The hardest part was still coming, and Meghan's silence continued to speak louder than any statement. Because silence is not emptiness. Silence is information. Silence is controlled. Silence is chosen. People who analyze high-stakes interactions say there are only 3 reasons someone stays silent in a moment like this. They are protecting themselves. They are protecting someone else. Or the truth is already too large to contain. Which one applied here? No one knew. But the courtroom didn't need answers to feel the weight of the moment. Because even without explanation, everyone could sense that the apology wasn't the event. It was the warning, the beginning of something unfolding. Not slowly, but with force. And what made the moment even more chilling was what happened next. The judge instructed the room to proceed. But before the next attorney could speak, a voice from the gallery requested permission to address the court. Not loud, not aggressive. Calm, controlled, unexpected. And when the judge turned to see who it was, the expression on his face changed. Not in alarm, not in irritation, but in recognition, as if he knew this moment was coming. Even if no one else did. The request was granted, and the person stood, not from the legal teams, not from the royal representatives, not from anyone who was expected to participate, someone who wasn't supposed to speak at all, someone whose involvement introduced a new reality. This wasn't accidental. It wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't a slip. It was the beginning of exposure. And in the seconds before this individual opened their mouth, everyone in the room sensed the same thing. The apology was not the story. It was the signal. The real story was about to begin. But what happened next would change the narrative permanently. And no one saw it coming. 3 days before the hearing, nothing about Harry and Meghan's world looked unusual. At least, not from the outside. They were in California. Their schedules were quiet. No public statements. No visible tension. Just the usual silence that surrounds them before any legal proceeding. But inside their inner circle, something had already shifted. And the first sign came in the most unexpected way. At exactly 6:47 a.m., a call was made to one of their senior advisors, one of the few people who had remained with them through every crisis, every lawsuit, every headline. The call was short, less than 2 minutes. No shouting, no panic, just a quiet conversation that ended with a single instruction. We need to meet. Today. Not tomorrow. Not later in the week. Today. And that urgency had nothing to do with strategy. It had to do with something that had just arrived. But before we get to that moment, there's something you need to understand. Harry and Meghan are not strangers to pressure. They've faced public outrage, royal tension, family division, legal battles that dragged on for years. Through all of it, they've remained remarkably consistent. Control the narrative. Stay united. Never react without preparation. So when advisors begin panicking, not publicly, but privately, it means one thing. Something entered the picture that they were not prepared for. And that something surfaced 72 hours before the hearing. The meeting took place in a private residence, not an office. Phones were placed in another room. No assistants were present. Just 4 people. Harry, Meghan, and two advisors. And before anyone spoke, the energy in the room was already different. According to someone familiar with the atmosphere, Meghan wasn't seated when the discussion began. She was pacing, not angrily, not frantically, just pacing, a sign of someone trying to control adrenaline rather than express it. Harry sat still, hands clasped, jaw tight. People who know him say that when he becomes silent, it's not calm, it's contained emotion. And this wasn't the silence of someone preparing for strategy. It was the silence of someone processing impact. Then the documents were placed on the table. Not printed emails, not online screenshots, not rumors. Hard copies, delivered from a source no one expected to be involved. And when the advisors began explaining what had been received, Harry didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. He just stared, as if the information wasn't new. Only the timing was. But Meghan reacted differently. She sat down slowly, folded her hands, and listened without speaking. Not defensive, not emotional, just absorbing. The meeting didn't last an hour. It lasted nearly 5. And here's the part that raised immediate alarm. No decision was made. Not one. Harry and Meghan are known for making quick choices, sometimes impulsively, sometimes boldly, but always decisively. But that day, they didn't choose a strategy. They didn't release a statement. They didn't contact the legal team. They did one thing instead. They waited. And waiting is not neutral. Waiting is preparation. Waiting is acknowledgement. Waiting means something bigger was expected to happen. Now ask yourself, what kind of information forces silence from two people who built their public identity on speaking out? Because silence is not their brand. Speaking is. So why stop now? The answer surfaced the next morning. Another message arrived. This time, not in California, in London. A sealed communication was delivered to a legal representative connected to the case. No return address. No sender identified. But the contents were linked to the same documents reviewed the day before. And that consistency confirmed the worst possibility. Whoever sent it wasn't guessing. They had information. Not theories. Not speculation. Evidence. That changed everything. Because in legal situations, evidence isn't dangerous because of what it reveals. It's dangerous because of what it forces. And in this case, it forced something Harry and Meghan had avoided for years. A timeline. Not a narrative. Not a denial. A timeline. Because once a timeline becomes part of a legal process, it can no longer be controlled. It can only be clarified. And that word, clarified, was the same word Harry used in court. Which means the decision to apologize didn't happen in the courtroom. It happened here, in a private room, 72 hours earlier. But we're not finished. Because what happened next wasn't a reaction, it was a fracture. After the second delivery, the legal team called an emergency meeting. Not by video. In person. They requested Harry and Meghan return earlier than planned. And here's where the story takes a sharp turn. Meghan wanted to delay. Not indefinitely. Just long enough to assess the situation. Harry disagreed. Not loudly. Not emotionally. But firmly. People close to them say the disagreement was subtle, but significant. Not a fight. A divide. Because for the first time in years, their instinct wasn't aligned. Harry wanted to confront. Meghan wanted to contain. Both strategies made sense. But only one could happen. And the legal team needed a decision immediately. The problem? Neither option was safe. Option 1. Ignore the documents and proceed as planned. But if the sender made the information public first, the fallout would be catastrophic. Option 2. Address the issue before the hearing. But doing so would confirm the existence of something they had spent years protecting. There was no third option. No safe option. And that's when the most critical development occurred. Someone inside the legal circle asked a question that changed the tone of the room. Is there anything else we should know before we proceed? It was the kind of question people only ask when they sense there's more beneath the surface. Silence followed. Not confusion. Not surprise. Silence. And silence always has meaning. Then Harry did something no one expected. He stood up and walked out of the room. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. He just left. Leaving everyone, including Meghan, sitting in the tension he walked away from. One advisor attempted to follow him, but Meghan stopped them. She said he needed a moment. But here's the thing most people don't realize. When someone leaves a room during a crisis, it's not because they don't know what to say. It's because they know exactly what the truth is. And they're deciding whether they're ready to say it. And in that pause, the dynamic changed. Because when Harry returned 20 minutes later, he didn't sit back down. He remained standing and said something that shifted the entire strategy. We can't stop this anymore. Not, we can't avoid it. Not, we need to explain it. Not, we should prepare. We can't stop this anymore. That sentence didn't sound like someone reacting to new information. It sounded like someone acknowledging the arrival of something inevitable. And that was the moment Meghan closed her eyes. Not dramatically, not in despair, just for a second, as if she already knew the direction this was heading. The advisors asked what Harry meant, but he didn't answer directly. He said the situation was already in motion, and that whatever decision they made would only determine how much control they still had. In other words, the truth wasn't coming. The truth was already here, and now they had to manage the fallout, not prevent it. But that wasn't the final turning point. Something else happened that night. Harry and Meghan made a phone call. Not to the palace, not to family, to someone who had not been part of their lives for a very long time. A person who, according to multiple sources, reacted with a single sentence. I told you this day would come. And that response was not comforting. It was a warning, because when someone says a moment was inevitable, it means the truth didn't arrive suddenly. It was only waiting for the right opening. The next morning, Harry and Meghan flew out earlier than scheduled. They didn't sit together on the flight. One sat near the front, the other near the middle. And no one traveling with them asked why. Because when two people are preparing for impact, the goal isn't comfort. The goal is endurance. When they landed, they were transported separately. Again, not a dramatic choice. A strategic one. Separate presence. Separate preparation. Separate messaging. Why? Because when a single statement is coming, unity is powerful. But when multiple truths might surface, separation is survival. For the next 24 hours, they met with legal teams behind closed doors. No leaks. No updates. No statements. Just silence. And silence isn't emptiness. Silence is movement you can't see. Then, 20 hours before the hearing, one final message arrived. This time, not delivered physically, sent electronically. But unlike the previous communications, this one came with a deadline. And that deadline matched the time of the hearing. Meaning, whatever was coming was timed. Not random. Not accidental. Intentional. So now the picture becomes clear. Harry's apology was not spontaneous. It was not emotional. It was not reactive. It was predecided. Because the alternative was worse. But the part no one expected was what happened next. After receiving the final message, Harry and Meghan didn't meet together. They met separately. 2 rooms. 2 advisors. 2 conversations that would shape what happened in court. And during Meghan's meeting, someone asked her a direct question. Are you prepared for this to become public? Her answer wasn't yes. It wasn't no. She said, it was never supposed to go this far. Not this isn't true. Not they won't release it. Not we can stop it. It was never supposed to go this far. Meaning, there was a plan. There was a limit. That limit has now been crossed. But crossed by who? We still don't know. Because the sender has not been identified. Not publicly. Not privately. At least, not yet. And that brings us to the final moment before the hearing. 3 hours before they entered the courtroom, Harry and Meghan met one last time. Not to finalize strategy. Not to rehearse statements. To agree on something else. Who would speak first? And Meghan didn't choose herself. She chose Harry. Why? Because whatever truth was coming next was tied to him, not her. And that explains everything. Why she glanced at him before he spoke. Why she stayed silent during the apology. Why she didn't intervene. Because she wasn't waiting for him to apologize. She was waiting for confirmation that the countdown had begun. And once he spoke, there was no going back. But the real turning point wasn't the apology. It was the moment someone else stood up in the courtroom. The person no one expected to be involved. And the reason they were there traces directly back to the message delivered 72 hours earlier. Because whatever arrived that day didn't just change strategy. It changed the entire story. What happens next will reveal who sent the documents and why they waited until now to expose the truth. But the answer isn't what anyone expects. And no one is prepared for what comes next. Everyone thought they knew the story of Archie Harrison's arrival. A royal birth. A new baby. A moment the world celebrated. End of story, right? Except it never was. Because from the very beginning, long before rumors surfaced, long before timelines were questioned, long before today's courtroom shock, there was something about Archie's birth that didn't fit. Something small, something subtle, something most people shrugged off. Until now. Today, that tiny detail isn't just suspicious. It's the missing piece. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's start with the most basic question. Where was Archie born? For most royal babies, the answer is straightforward. Documented, photographed, historically recorded. Prince William and Prince Harry were born at St. Mary's Hospital, a tradition that continued with Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. But Archie? His birth location was never confirmed. Not officially, not clearly, not in the way the public has come to expect from the royal family. Instead, the announcement appeared hours after the fact, vague and oddly structured. It stated Meghan went into labor, and then, almost immediately, Archie had already been born. How does a labor announcement come after the birth? Reporters were stunned, not because babies don't come quickly, but because royal announcements never come late. Except this one did. By hours. Why? No one had an answer. And when journalists attempted to verify hospital records, the response was even stranger. A spokesperson declined to comment. Not, no record exists. Not, information is private. Just refuse to answer. Ask yourself this. If everything was normal, why refuse a harmless confirmation? Privacy doesn't require silence. It requires boundaries. Silence creates suspicion. And that silence wasn't the only anomaly. There was also the timing. The official announcement claimed Archie was born at 5:26 a.m. Yet the first public statement came around 2 p.m., almost 9 hours later. But Meghan and Harry weren't at the hospital when that announcement was made. They were at Windsor, smiling, relaxed, photographed near St. George's Hall, not recovering from birth, not surrounded by medical staff, not showing any signs of just having had a baby. Anyone who has ever witnessed childbirth knows the physical reality. Recovery takes time. Movement is limited. Appearance changes. But Meghan walked as if nothing had happened mere hours earlier. Was it possible? Technically, yes. Was it likely? Not at all. Especially for a first-time mother at 37. Doctors around the world said the same thing. It doesn't add up. But the public didn't push. Because no one wanted to question a new mother. It felt invasive. Insensitive. Unnecessary. So people let it go. But the timeline didn't. It followed them. Quietly. Persistently. Waiting. Now fast forward to the christening. Another moment that raised questions, not because of what was shown, but because of what wasn't. Royal christenings are historic events. Documented in detail. Announced publicly. Photographed with transparency. Archie's christening. Closed doors. No press. No arrival footage. No ceremonial documentation. A single photo was released. A pose group shot. But here's the key detail. No image showed Archie being held up close. Every shot positioned him at a distance, partially covered, or turned away. Why? Babies are not security risks. There was no threat. So what was being protected? Now add the next layer. When royal births are registered, they follow a strict protocol. Public record. Legal documentation. Standard timeline. But Archie's birth certificate was altered weeks after filing. Not reprinted. Not corrected. Amended. Names changed. Details adjusted. And the reason for the amendment? Never explained. Combine these events. A delayed birth announcement. A missing hospital confirmation. A 9-hour information gap. A private christening. An amended birth certificate. One anomaly can be coincidence. 5 becomes a pattern. Still, even then, many defended the couple. People said they wanted privacy. They said Meghan endured pressure. They said the media was intrusive. And those points were fair. Until one more moment shattered the narrative. The hospital spokesperson refused to answer a single question. Was Meghan Markle ever admitted to give birth on May 6? Not, we cannot discuss patient details. Not, we respect medical privacy. Just silence. Total refusal. Even Kensington Palace, known for icy but controlled messaging, does not refuse clarification on procedural norms. But here, silence replaced protocol. And silence always means one of two things. There is nothing to clarify, or there is something to hide. Which one feels more likely now? But this wasn't the only red flag. There was also the matter of witnesses. With every royal birth since Diana, hospital staff have spoken publicly, not about private details, but about the honor of participating. Nurses, doctors, midwives, not identifying themselves, just acknowledging involvement. But with Archie, not a single medical professional came forward. Not one. In any country. In any interview. At any time. The silence wasn't normal. It was unprecedented. Still, the world moved on. People celebrated the baby. Supporters defended the couple. Critics were dismissed as conspiratorial. Until another detail resurfaced later. The photo call. 2 days after Archie's birth, Meghan and Harry presented him to the public. But unlike every royal newborn in modern history, the baby's face was almost entirely covered. Not for a religious reason. Not for health concerns. Just covered. And the press noticed something else. Meghan's body appeared unchanged. Not slimmer. Not hidden. Unchanged. Medical experts quietly commented that her appearance didn't match a 2-day postpartum recovery. Not impossible. Just improbable. And when the footage was slowed and analyzed, you can see Harry adjusting his hold on the blanket multiple times. Not to steady the baby, but to conceal movement. Was it nerves? New parent anxiety? Maybe. But if everything was normal, why did every detail feel intentional? Now jump forward. Lilibet's birth announcement repeated the same pattern. Delayed reporting. No hospital confirmation. No documentation released. Except this time, something even stranger occurred. A senior palace official stated they were not informed in advance of the birth. That has never happened in royal history. Not once. Even estranged family members receive logistical notice. But here, the palace was bypassed entirely. Why? At the time, most people assumed the couple wanted independence. Now it looks like something else. Consistency. A pattern. A replication of secrecy. And patterns don't happen by accident. So let's go back to the courtroom. Why would someone refuse to answer a hospital-related question? Because hospitals are obligated to confirm 3 things without revealing medical information. Number 1. Whether they provide maternity services. Number 2. Whether a public figure delivered there. Number 3. Whether they issued a press release about the birth. They are not required to reveal medical details. They are not allowed to release private data. But they can confirm logistical facts. Yet in this case, they refused. Which leaves only one conclusion. Confirming the information would contradict the public story. And contradicting the public story would expose something larger. Something that connects. The timeline. The secrecy. The paperwork. The silence. And now, after today's apology, the question that once hovered quietly on the edges of speculation has become unavoidable. Was Archie born to Meghan and Harry biologically? Or was another arrangement involved? Surrogacy? Private gestational carrier? Prearranged birth? None of those possibilities are illegal. None are unethical when handled transparently. But secrecy changes everything, especially for royals, because royal succession is determined by bloodline. And bloodline requires confirmation, which means this isn't just a family matter. It's constitutional. So now, with the courtroom apology delivered and the timeline cracks exposed, one final question remains. Why did this issue resurface now? After 5 years of silence, something triggered it. Something recent. Something powerful. Something no longer containable. Because if rumors alone were enough, this moment would have happened years ago. It didn't. It happened today. Which means someone didn't just send documents. They sent proof. And that proof connects directly to the missing answer behind the hospital refusal. But here's the part no one is prepared for. The hospital spokesperson wasn't the only person who refused to answer a question. Someone else did. Someone much closer. Someone whose silence was not procedural, but personal. And when this individual was pressed privately, they responded with a sentence that chilled everyone who heard it. I can't confirm what I was never told. Who said it? And what were they referring to? That answer is coming. But before we reveal the person behind that sentence, before we uncover the identity of the silent witness, before we expose the connection that ties the original timeline to the courtroom moment, we need to look at the second birth. Because Lilibet's arrival didn't just repeat the pattern. It escalated it. And what happened next changed everything. And no one saw it coming. The world was still recovering from Archie's mysterious arrival when the second shock came. Lilibet Diana, a name that carried history, a name that invoked legacy, a name tied to the one person Meghan and Harry insisted they loved without condition, the late Queen Elizabeth. But from the moment the announcement was released, something felt different. Not emotional, not celebratory, off. And at first, no one could explain why, until they looked closer. Because unlike Archie's birth, which already raised quiet questions, Lilibet's announcement didn't just create confusion, it created contradiction. Let's start with the moment the news broke. The world discovered Lilibet had been born only after the fact. Not minutes later, not hours later, but days. The public statement was released on June 6th, yet the birth had supposedly taken place on June 4th. A 2-day delay, unprecedented for a royal baby. Royal births are not announced late. They are announced quickly, even when details are limited. Why? Because royal lineage is a matter of record. But this time, the record didn't arrive when it should have. And that delay became the first crack. Still, people defended the timing. They said the couple wanted privacy. They said they deserved time to bond. They said the media had treated Meghan cruelly during her first pregnancy. All understandable arguments. But privacy doesn't explain inconsistency. Because once the announcement was released, a second question emerged. Where exactly was Lilibet born? The statement said Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, a respected facility, a real location. But here's where the confusion deepened. No official hospital confirmation was issued. Not from the institution. Not from medical representatives. Not from standard public channels. And unlike in the UK, American hospitals are not restricted from confirming non-medical details, such as whether a high-profile birth took place, whether they released a statement, whether the announcement was coordinated. Yet in this case, silence. No acknowledgement. No confirmation. Not even a neutral statement like, "We cannot discuss patient information." Just nothing. And silence is never normal in a high-profile birth, especially one involving a former senior royal and a media-dominant couple. But the timing isn't even the strangest part. The palace reaction was. When Lilibet's name was announced, reports surfaced claiming Queen Elizabeth had been notified in advance. Then suddenly, another version appeared, suggesting she had not been asked permission. Two completely opposite accounts, both circulated publicly within 48 hours. That has never happened in modern royal history. Royal communications are controlled, consistent, and synchronized. Yet here, messaging fractured. And fractures only happen when a story isn't aligned internally. So which version was true? No one knows. Because Buckingham Palace didn't clarify. They issued a vague, measured sentence saying, "The Queen was informed." Not approved. Not gave blessing. Not was consulted beforehand. Just informed. After the fact. And that single word, informed, set off alarm bells across royal analysts and historians. Because being informed is not the same as being asked. Being told is not the same as being included. And the palace's refusal to expand fueled more questions. But the strangeness continued. Unlike Archie, no official photograph accompanied the announcement. No newborn image. No family portrait. Not even a silhouette. And while privacy may explain withholding images, it does not explain withholding confirmation, especially when the child is seventh in line to the throne. Lineage requires documentation. Birth requires verification. But verification never came. Not then. Not later. Instead, months passed. And every time the subject surfaced, the response was the same. Silence. Now pause for a moment and ask yourself, why would two births in a row follow identical patterns of secrecy? Once could be emotional protection. Twice becomes structural. Patterns don't appear accidentally. They appear because something requires consistency. But we're not done. Because the most significant anomaly in Lilibet's story came not from the announcement, but from the christening claims. Months later, a report emerged stating Lilibet had been christened in a private ceremony in California. Unusual, but possible. Except there was one problem. The Church of England had no record of it. Not that they publicly denied it, but that no documentation was issued confirming the sacrament occurred under Anglican protocol. Royal christenings are not just religious ceremonies. They are constitutional events. They require witnesses, records, verification. But here, none was provided. Then came the next twist. Sources claim the Archbishop of Canterbury traveled to California to perform the ceremony. But journalists quickly noted the Archbishop was confirmed in the UK on the date in question, attending scheduled events. So which version was true? No one clarified. Not the palace, not the couple, not the church. Another silence. Another contradiction. Another detail that didn't align. Still, the public didn't force answers. People assumed the couple was protecting their children from scrutiny. But that assumption collapsed when an unexpected moment occurred. A senior palace aide, speaking off the record, was asked whether the royal household had received formal documentation of Lilibet's birth. Their response was chilling. That information has not been verified through our channels. Not refused. Not denied. Not even we cannot discuss. Just not verified. Meaning, the palace had no independent confirmation. And if the palace did not receive verification, then how did Lilibet enter the line of succession? Because under royal protocol, a child must be born biologically to a royal parent. To hold a position in the order, that is not speculation. That is constitutional fact. So now, the stakes become clear. This isn't about photos, or privacy, or personal boundaries. It's about lineage. And lineage is the foundation of monarchy. But here's the part that ties everything together. When reporters attempted to obtain basic public documentation from California, they discovered the birth certificate was restricted, not sealed for privacy due to threat concerns, restricted from public request entirely. Even high-profile American celebrities have publicly accessible birth records with limited information. But in this case, access was blocked. Again, highly unusual. So now we have a series of unresolved questions. Delayed announcement. No immediate hospital confirmation. Conflicting palace statements. No official christening record. Restricted documentation. At what point does coincidence become structure? But the most startling detail didn't emerge from the public. It came from a private conversation. A comment made by someone who was expected to be involved in Lilibet's early care. When asked whether they were present at any stage before or after the birth, they responded, "I never met the baby." Not unusual on its own. Until the follow-up question was asked, "Were you told why?" And the answer was, "I wasn't told anything. I only know what everyone else knows." Meaning, people who should have been informed were not. Not because of privacy, but because there was no internal communication at all. That doesn't match protection. It matches exclusion. So now we return to the courtroom. Why did the topic of parentage appear in a legal setting that had nothing to do with the children? Because someone resurfaced information that connects both births. The secrecy around Archie's timeline, and the contradictions around Lilibet's. Not as established fact, not as confirmed truth, but as evidence that required clarification. And that word, clarification, is the exact word Harry used when he told the judge, "There are matters we will need to clarify. Not deny, not dismiss. Clarify." Which means the issue is no longer theoretical. Something triggered the need to address it. Not publicly, but legally. And legal clarification only happens when someone else has presented information first. Now the question becomes, who presented it? Because the person who stood up in the courtroom was not acting independently. Their involvement traces directly back to the moment Lilibet's announcement conflicted with palace communication. And the reason they appeared in court had nothing to do with rumors, but with something that was never supposed to surface. We're now approaching the moment where speculation stops and pressure begins, because the next chapter isn't about what the public saw. It's about what the royal institution knew, and when they knew it. And once that becomes clear, the entire narrative changes, and no one saw it coming. You would think the royal family responded to breaking news the same way the rest of the world does. They don't. There is no scrambling, no chaos, no shouting across hallways like scenes from a movie. Instead, the royal machine moves in silence. Quiet rooms, closed doors, short statements that mean everything and reveal nothing. And when the apology from Harry reached Buckingham Palace, the silence changed. Not publicly, not through a press release, not with visible consequences. Internally, because while the world reacted with shock, disbelief, anger, and confusion, the palace reacted with something different. Preparation. Let's start with what most people don't know. The royal institution, often referred to as the firm, has three modes of response: containment, correction, consequence. Containment is used when information can be controlled. Correction is used when information must be redirected. Consequence is used when information threatens the monarchy itself. And the moment Harry apologized in court, the system shifted out of containment. That alone tells you everything. Because until that moment, the palace could ignore rumors, dismiss speculation, and treat the situation as distance. But an apology changes classification. It moves a narrative from rumor to acknowledgement. And acknowledgement requires response. So what happened behind palace walls in the hours after the court session? More than anyone realizes. The first reaction wasn't emotional. It was strategic. A message was delivered to three key figures: the king, the Prince of Wales, and the palace communications director. Not a dramatic phone call. Not a panicked conversation. A simple notification. Statement made. Clarification expected. Notice the wording. Not apology given. Not concerns raised. Statement made. Clarification expected. The palace never reacts to what is said. They react to what it implies. And Harry's apology implied one thing. Something was coming next. Something that would require institutional action. But here's the most surprising part. The palace did not immediately call Harry. They didn't request an explanation. They didn't demand details. They didn't attempt to intervene. Why? Because in the royal system, asking questions creates responsibility. If the monarchy asks and receives information, they become accountable for knowing it. So instead of seeking information, they waited. Not passively, strategically, because waiting forces the other side to reveal first. But not everyone was prepared to wait. Sources say Prince William reacted differently. Not with anger, not with panic, with urgency. He reportedly asked a direct question during a private briefing. What is the scope? Not what happened. Not what does this mean? What is the scope? Scope means scale, reach, risk. Because William understands something the public often forgets. Personal scandals fade. Constitutional questions don't. And parentage is not a personal matter for a royal child. It is a constitutional one. Now, let's address the assumption many people have, that the palace was caught off guard. They weren't. Not entirely. There had been quiet concern for years. Not about gossip, but about protocol. Royal births require verification through official channels, even when not publicized. If that verification was incomplete, inconsistent, or delayed, it would have triggered internal hesitation long before today. But hesitation is not action. Action only occurs when silence becomes impossible. And Harry made silence impossible. But here's where the story becomes even more revealing. The palace didn't ask, what did Harry mean? They asked, what does someone else have? Because apologies are never made for information that belongs to you. Apologies are made when information belongs to someone else. Which means the royal family didn't react to Harry's words. They reacted to the unseen catalyst behind them. And that catalyst sparked the second stage of response. Monitoring. A small team within the institution began tracking three things: media activity, legal development, international reaction. Not for gossip, for escalation. Because escalation determines whether a situation can be ignored or whether it becomes a threat. And within 12 hours, they saw the shift. News outlets weren't treating this like a comment. They were treating it like a development. That's when the third stage activated. Internal assessment. People assume the monarchy operates emotionally, but in reality, it behaves like a government agency. Every issue goes through 4 internal questions. Does this affect the line of succession? Does this affect public trust in the crown? Does this affect diplomatic relationships? Does this create legal vulnerability? If the answer to even one is yes, the situation is elevated. This time, all 4 applied. Because if Archie and Lilibet's biological parentage requires clarification, the impact is not personal. It's structural. It affects titles, inheritance, status, royal precedents, historical record. That is why the palace did not issue a response immediately. Not because they were unprepared, because the consequences were too large to address quickly. But behind the scenes, the reaction wasn't uniform. Someone inside the family was furious. Not because of what was said, but because of when it was said. Imagine finding out that the institution you represent is about to be pulled into a legal situation you were given no warning about. Now imagine that situation involves children who are part of the royal bloodline narrative. Now imagine the entire world knows before you do. Someone close to the situation described the reaction as betrayal without explanation. But betrayal isn't the most dangerous emotion inside the monarchy. The most dangerous is exposure. Because exposure forces action. And action came faster than anyone expected. Within 24 hours, a private briefing was scheduled.